Couple of comments about the notion of a dictator that came up, and I just wanted to clarify some more things about the dictator, and also wanted to give you a little bit more about the victory auction, and actually victory auctions are not used, it turns out, in practice, and why that's the case. And then after that I'll go into what's called the Vickrey-Clark-Groves mechanism, the VCG mechanism, and the Clark pivot value, which is part of the mechanism. And then the last part is really about the limitations of mechanism design, or what happens when you try to use it. And then we'll sum up with the limitations of game theory, what happens when you try to use game theory in practice. And that pretty much concludes what I wanted to say about game theory, and we'll start with the statistics, advanced statistics next time. So dictatorship. So we had a sort of this question of what does a dictator mean in the arrow sense of the word. And I think the easiest way to understand what it is by thinking of casting a decisive vote. So let's say you have a odd number of people voting for something, right? Your odd number of people, and then so you're going to have two sets of, and let's say they evenly match. So let's say you have you have 9 people who are casting a vote, and let's say there are 2 alternatives, and 4 people chose one alternative, 4 people choose the other alternative, right? Then there is going to be one person who can make the decision go either way. He can make it go this way or that, right? So that person, in the sense of arrow, is the dictator. Okay, in the sense of arrow, that person is the dictator because that one person controls the overall outcome of the vote. Okay, so what the arrow theorem really is saying is that no matter how you vote, maybe you don't like majority votes, you like something else, you want to do some other election method, proportional representation or whatever, in the end, if you have more than 2 alternatives, if you have 2 alternatives you can get by, but with 3 alternatives or more, then there will always be a person who's a dictator who can make the outcome of the vote be one way or the other. Okay, so that's bad, right? Because essentially the outcome is decided by a single person. But the funny part about this is that the person who's casting the decisive vote may not know that that person is the dictator. It's like an unknowing dictator. Okay, because when you, let us say the election is going on and you cast a vote, you may be the decisive vote, right? But in some sense, everybody is a decisive vote also. The person who is a dictator doesn't actually know that they're a dictator. So it's a very funny kind of dictatorship. It's a dictatorship with no power. Okay, so it's just a word rather than exact things. I just wanted to mention that because I was digging more into it. The other aspect of this is that if the preference structure changes, okay, to give an example, I said 4 people had voted for one, 4 for the other, and then the 9th person is a dictator. If the preference structure changes, a different person will become dictator. They may be in a position to influence. And so the arrow theorem assumes that the preference structure is fixed. So given a particular preference structure in society, then one person becomes sort of the dictator. Okay, are there any questions about this over here? Okay, the second thing I want to talk about is the victory auction. I guess I didn't write it down, but the victory auction is essentially giving you the second price, giving the seller the second price. So recall that I said in a true auction, I want to sell this duster over here, and I find out everybody's internal valuation, and I sell it to the person with the highest valuation for the highest possible price. So for me, as a seller, the maximum revenue comes when I know your true valuation. Now, a victory auction does not actually give you the maximum revenue. We talked about this notion as the cost of truthfulness, right? In fact, 2 observations are important to make over here, which it's in the notes, but I didn't really talk about it too much. The first thing is that if the second price is very low, let's say I have this duster, and there's somebody here who's willing to pay $10,000 for it, but the second price is 1 cent, and everybody else is at 0.5 cents or below. It can happen. So even though there was a willing buyer willing to pay $10,000, with the second price, I'm going to actually have to sell it for just 1 cent, right? So I can make the difference between first price and second price arbitrarily large, and that's a crazy thing to happen, right? Because the seller knows that there's somebody willing to pay $10,000, but the victory auction forces the seller to sell it for 1 cent, right? I mean, why would you do that? Because in some sense, you can say, well, I did the victory auction. I have the mathematical structure forces people to reveal the truth. So now I know the truth. I know there's somebody out there willing to pay $10,000, and yet I'm forced to give it for 1 cent. So it's perverse in the way it works, and so nobody uses it. Okay. Apparently, the only people use it are stamp collectors. And why stamp collectors use victory auctions is, I haven't investigated that yet, but that's something I found out. So that is a problem. Now, what the victory auction is able to do is to elicit the truth. Okay, it is not going to give you the maximum revenue. It elicits the truth, and it fulfills a certain social. The social welfare is maximized when the person who values it most gets it. Right? Think about it this way. Now, when the seller sells it or sells a good to the person who bids the highest, right? The person who bids at the highest, then the person who values it most did get it after all, right? In fact, very likely they valued it more than the seller, because if the seller had a higher valuation than the person who valued it most, they wouldn't sell it. Right? Let's say if the duster to me is worth $100 and the highest bid came in at $5, then it's worth more to me, so I won't even sell it. So, you know, the reserve price is my minimum valuation, is what I at least want. So the victory auction does achieve the social welfare of giving it to the person with the maximum value. However, it does not achieve the goal of maximizing the revenue, right? And so one might argue, why would a seller want to take part in such an auction? Why would the seller want to give away something? And that is the reason why eBay does not use victory auctions. You know, eBay uses essentially a stepped auction. There are no simultaneous bids. You have, you know, bids going in, and you can see the other bids, etc., which doesn't have, you know, the simultaneous bid type issues. Which brings me to sort of a sad footnote, which is that the victory auction is the basis of mechanism design and the basis of the VCG, the victory Clark-Gross mechanism, which we'll discuss today. And yet it has this intrinsic problem. So you know, it's sort of, this is the best that they can do, and it's not that great. Okay, so we'll come to some of the other limitations of mechanism design, but before that, I'm going to spend, you know, on a generalization of the victory auction in the what's called the victory Clark-Gross mechanism. Okay, so we'll go sort of into the math of that. You'll see how that works, and it's really a very elegant, nice piece of work, and worth looking at because of that reason. Okay, any questions about that so far? Okay, so let me remind you of the structure of a mechanism. Basically, we have some agents, and the agents have some types, and then we have essentially a game that is set up, and what happens is that this creates a strategy space, and then there is an equilibrium outcome, which is S star, which is the equilibrium or the equilibrium outcome. And then the outcome function G operates on S star to essentially compute the social welfare function X star, right? That's the, actually, I guess it's calling it O over here. You can just call it O star as being the giving you this outcome over here. And the mechanism is set to implement function F. The types over here are the T, which is the product of the type spaces. So we're basically saying f of t gives you this, and g of s of star gives you this as well. Or if you want to be more precise, g of s star of t gives you the same as well. Okay, so you can get to the same outcome O star, which is what you want. In the case of the victory auction, you want to give the goods to the person who has the highest valuation for it. That's the social welfare function f. And it's done through the game, the rules of the game. And the rules of the game induce equilibrium strategy profile S star. You do the outcome function on it, and you get that. Okay, so that's the structure of any mechanism. What I'm going to now describe is a specific mechanism called the victory Clark-Grove mechanism. Now, I should add that actually the VCG, as the acronym goes, is there are actually several things going on. So Groves came up with the mechanism around 1973. He came up with this idea over here, and then Clark added something called the Clark pivot, which we'll talk about next. And so it became called Clark-Groves mechanisms, you know, around, I don't know, the mid-80s. So when I was studying it, it was called the Clark-Groves mechanism. And then people realize, you know what, this actually follows from Vickery, so let's put Vickery as well. So now today everybody calls it VCG or Vickery-Clark-Groves, but I studied it as Clark-Groves, and no doubt people before that called it the Groves mechanism. So who knows, in 10 years from now they may add another name to it. But at any rate, today it's called the VCG. Instead of going into all the details of who did what, I'm going to skip all of that and just call all of it the VCG, though of course the contributions are made by 3 different people at 3 different points in time. Okay, so last time we discussed this notion that that any mechanism can be reduced to a direct mechanism, a direct revelation mechanism, where the agents, instead of playing strategy spaces like so, essentially just tell you their types. Okay, they tell you what type it is, and then I kind of talked about it, and the proof is actually pretty straightforward, that any mechanism which is where you have some strategy S can be replaced by a mechanism where the strategy is nothing more than revealing your type. So just say I am of type T1. At that point, the rules can be changed such that the principal over here, who is carrying out the game really, is going to use those types, simulate what the strategy would have been, and then simulate what the outcome would have been and come up with the appropriate outcome over here. So because of this, we really don't study any games that are not direct revelation types. Now I should add that the direct revelation principle only holds for dominant strategy equilibrium, but that's what we're studying right now. So we're going to use the direct revelation principle and say that agents are going to reveal the type directly. So the VCG is a direct revelation principle or a direct mechanism where truth telling is the dominant strategy. Okay, so how does it work? What happens over here is that each person is telling their type, so we'll call that type to be T. So the ith person is going to say the type Ti. And of course they could lie, so we represent lies by a hat. So what they're actually going to say is Ti hat. So each agent says, my type is Ti hat. Their actual type is Ti, but what they say is Ti hat. Okay? And of course, we want to make sure that in equilibrium, they will in fact say Ti hat. They'll actually, Ti hat will be equal to Ti. We haven't said that how that happens yet, but that's what we want. All right? So what's going on in the mechanism is that we're going to make a couple of assumptions. The first assumption we're going to assume is that agents care about money. So if agents care about money, what that means is that in addition to the game, there's actually this other thing going on, which is payments. Okay? There's payments that could be made from the agents to the principal or from the principal to the agent. Okay? So maybe I should draw it over here. Let me think about it. There's outcomes. I'm just drawing the principal over here. So there's some money that's exchanging hands. And these are payments that are being carried through in order for us to have truthfulness be the dominant strategy equilibrium. Okay? Now, again, if you think of the auction, what's going on in payments is that, if somebody buys something, they're paying the seller, they're paying the principal some money, right? So that's a payment going across. If somebody comes to you and says, I'll give you $100, vote for so-and-so candidate, that's also a payment. So bribing is okay in this setup, okay? And it's just called a payment. So agents care about money, which means that the utility function is it's called quasi-linear. That's just a technical term for it. All right. The second thing we assume is that the principal knows the form of the utility function, okay, which means that the principal sort of knows everything about the agent except the exact value Ti. We can assume Ti to be an integer. Okay, for all we care, it's just an integer. Except for this value of Ti, it knows everything else about the function. Okay, so in particular, we assume that the utility of the ith player, which is u sub I, okay, and it depends on okay, and we're going to replace the outcome. We're going to call that over here x. Okay, in the BCG mechanism, we denote the outcomes by x. So utility of I for the outcome x, given a payment of PI, okay, care about money, they get payments made by I is called P sub I. Okay, so I pays a value P sub I. If the agent pays the principal, it's a positive payment. If the principal pays the agent, it's a negative payment. So that's a P sub I. UI of x, the outcome x, the payment that they make, and the type T sub I is equal to V sub I of x PI minus PI. Okay. So here what you're saying is that the utility has a very simple form. There's some function V sub I, the valuation, which is only a function of the outcome x and the type Ti, and you subtract from it the payment Pi. Okay. So it's not like you're dividing. You're not doing anything fancy with it. You're just saying, I have this valuation. So what does this mean? Since you're subtracting money from this has to have the units of money. Okay, so this is in dollars, that's in dollars as well. In other words, the implicit assumption here is that the valuation of a player of type T sub I for the outcome x can be expressed in dollars, right? Okay, so everything has to be expressed in this. So this means this is money. And agents care about money. We don't have arbitrary preferences over money. We can't say some people prefer less money over more money. It's always the case that more money is better than less money. Okay, so we're going to have that assumption over here. Okay, so this V function is given a name, and that's called the evaluation function. That's okay. So I still haven't said how this works. Let me give you one more piece of terminology over here. We'll just say that the outcome that the G has over the strategy profile. So in this case over here, we see that G of S star of T is nothing more than G of T, right? Because we're just going to have the types come in, actually G of T hat. Okay, and we'll call this just a value outcome as X star. The X star is the outcome. So each person represents T sub I hat. That gives you the vector T hat. You compute the outcome on this. That outcome is represented as X star. Okay, that's just terminology here. And what happens now is that we finally get into the rules of the game. So this is the principal principal's actions. Okay. One, it asks agents to reveal type. Okay, Ti hat is the type that they're going to reveal. It says, okay, tell me your types. So it goes around, asks everybody for that. The second thing is it computes the outcome, which you recall we're just calling X star. And X star is defined as this. X star equals arg max X sigma I Vi X Ti. Okay. Ti hat. So what does this mean over here? So are you familiar with the argmax notation? Is anybody not familiar with the argmax notation? Does everybody know what it is? No? Okay. So argmax just means maximize. Okay? Maximize. Maximize the value on this over here. So choose X such that this value is maximized. It's an optimization problem. Okay? It's saying that the objective function is this, and the control variable is X. Okay? The parameter is X. So find the value of X such that this objective function is maximized, and that value is called X star. Okay? So what's going on over here? Again, a simplification is being made. We are assuming that we can simply sum the individual valuations. Okay, the individual valuation functions of each user, which is some money value. We're going to sum those up, and we're going to find the outcome such that this function over here is maximized. Okay, so that's the simplification. So we're assuming that the utilities are such that they can be added. Okay, now again, remember that utility functions cannot be added, right? Because you can have arbitrary utility functions. I can say, my valuation of this painting is $100 billion. That's what it is. And somebody says my valuation is 1 cent because incomparable. However, what happens is that we've got this money over here, the payment. Okay, and everybody is assumed to have the same value for money. Okay, if everybody has the same value for money, it's assumption, right? We care about money. I should say, care about money equally. In that case, there is this normalization going on, right? The normalization is going on, and so at that point we can argue, not necessarily correctly, but you can argue that this summation is a valid operation. Okay, we can sum up these valuations because basically everybody cares the same about money, and we're just summing up terms which are all like money over here, and so this is a valid operation. So what is the principal going to do? The principal gets everybody's types and then says, if I choose this outcome x star, then that is going to maximize the sum of everybody's individual valuations, okay, and that's the value of x star I'm going to compute. Okay. Any questions about this so far? So I'm just telling you what the rules of the game are. This is step 2 in the game. Okay? Now, this game can be manipulated. How can we manipulate it? Because I can reveal, if I am agent 5, I can reveal a type T5 to be such that, this x star is biased in my favor. For example, x star could be an outcome of an election or something like that. If somebody says, okay, how many people believe in something, want something, whatever, I could choose this value such that I could actually influence the outcome over here. To prevent this, we have a third step, which is a payment. Each individual PI, the ith agent gets a payment PI, which is defined as HI. Let me just write this down. HIT minus I hat. Sorry. Minus sigma j not equal to I Vj star. Okay. So the payment has got 2 terms in it. First is an arbitrary function which depends only on everybody else's types. So this is a payment to the ith person. Okay. So the ith agent gets something which depends only on everybody else. Okay, they can't change that outcome over there. So that's sort of some money being given to you, or you have to pay no matter what. And then over here, do you want to sit in the front row? You can probably see better from there than sitting over there. And the second term over here, okay, has a negative sign. Okay, what does this negative sign mean? That means that is a payment being made by the principal to the agent. Okay. Principal is going to give the agent some money. How much money are they giving them? They're going to give them the sum of the valuations of everybody else for that outcome, given whatever they said. Okay, so if they lied, whatever they did, we don't care. That's just the TJ hat. We're assuming that we can sum it up, so you can the same summation assumption holds over here, and we're just summing up the valuations of everybody else for that outcome. And that is the payment made by the principal to the agent. Okay? And the overall payment is this minus this. Now this is a payment that you're going to make from the principal to the agent. There's some other thing. If you make this large enough, then of course the payment will be made by the agent to the principal. But for now, just we're not talking about H at all. Okay? Any questions about this? So I just told you this rule, and I'm going to next explain why this rule makes sense. Okay, so just to step through, so in this over here, the agent tells the type, you compute x star as the argmax over here, and then the agent says, okay, I'm going to make a payment of H of HI Ti hat over here minus this. Okay, now I'm going to claim that with this payment, truth telling becomes incentive compatible. Okay, this payment structure forces every agent to tell the truth. Okay, so how do we do that? I need to erase something. Okay, let me erase this here. Yeah, this is fine. I think by now the picture should be clear. So the proof is absolutely trivial, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the utility of the ith agent, that's just u sub I, okay, of x star, because that's the outcome, pi ti equals vi of x star ti, right, minus pi. So let's just expand pi. So equals v sub I of x star ti minus h I of t minus I hat, right, plus sigma j not equal to I, vj of x star tj hat. Did I get it right? Not bad. Okay. So the utility of the ith agent is this. So the agent is going to sit there and say, okay, how can I tell a lie so that it maximizes my utility? Because it's a rational agent. What lie can it tell? So first of all, it says, no matter what I say, h is not going to change. H is not going to change because, you know, that's cast in concrete. All right? Let me see, can I change anything over here? Well, I can't change this either. I can't change anything just because this is summing over the valuations of everybody else. And it's a non-cooperative game. So I can't change this either. So the only thing I can change is this one, v sub I of x star ti, right? Okay. Now, let's take a look at this, okay, versus the maximization that's going on over here. What is the maximization going on over here? This maximization can be written as argmax x. We write it as two terms, sigma j not equal to I, vi of x, vj of xj tj hat plus v I of xi ti hat. All right. So what is the agent? What is the principle maximizing? It's maximizing two things. Something over here which I cannot control. It's all over j not equal to I, and something over here that I can control. It's vi xi ti hat. Compare the value in this box with the value in that box. That box over there says vi x star ti hat, and this is vi x star ti. Remember, what we're doing is to compute the argmax. Okay? The only way that this agent I can maximize that argmax is to tell the truth. When ti equals ti hat, that argmax is going to do the right thing. Okay? In other words, what's going on is this. The principle is saying, look, I'm going to do this maximization, this optimization problem, which is going to come up with some outcome. If you tell me anything except the truth, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. Okay, I don't know what it's going to be, because you could be telling me, I'm going to some kind of. So the only control that the ith agent has over the whole situation in order to create the argmax is to tell the truth. Ti equals ti hat. Okay. If it says anything else, what will happen? The payment that it gets, this payment over here, is going to be less than what it could get otherwise. So what you're doing basically is you're setting up a structure such that the ith agent is getting paid in such a way that the amount of payment exactly makes it convenient for them to tell the truth, or optimal for them to tell the truth. Okay. Any questions about this? Okay, so as I said, the proof is very simple. It's just two lines. Okay. The beauty over here is simply to come up with the structure over here. So if intuitively what's going on is that the payment over here is giving, the payment is set up so that the principal pays the agent everybody else's valuation for the outcome, okay, minus their own valuation. And so when you add it up, your local optimization Your local optimization is to optimize you. Your local optimization essentially inherits all of these terms. So your local optimization therefore matches the global optimization, and therefore you must tell the truth. You can only, the only optimization you can influence is to tell the truth. Okay. All right, so everybody looks confused over here. So, okay, I'll take some questions now. Everything is here. This is the entire mechanism. There's not even one symbol left out in the whole thing. Yes?
We actually had that X star there, the outcome, but that X factor is actually the third term as well in that equation.
This one?
Yeah.
Right.
Isn't it like affecting you? That could be evaluated as constant.
This one over here?
Yeah.
So X star is the optimal outcome as computed by the principal. The principal says, if you tell me these types, I'm going to do some computation and tell you, okay, my outcome is X star. This is the value that maximizes your utilities. Remember, the principal already knows the form of V. It already knows what V looks like. So when you plug in T, at that point, the principal knows exactly the utility function of every player.
But aren't we changing the value of X over time?
Are we changing X over time? No, X star is just the optimal value. X star is the outcome of an optimization problem. Okay, it's the outcome of optimization. It's optimization problem going over here. This is optimization right here. This argmax is an optimization. Okay, so you did hill climbing or linear, whatever it is. At the end of it, you say, okay, this is the value at which the that particular expression, the sum of the V functions, is maximized. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
I find it a bit confusing. I mean, you said that the payment makes me tell you the truth.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But the payment doesn't depend on the TI hash.
Oh, okay. So yes, yeah. Okay. So the question is, how is the payment making me tell the truth when payment doesn't include Ti hat, right? Remember, the payment includes the sum of the valuations on X star. Okay? And X star is based on Ti hat, right? If the outcome X star is independent of Ti hat, then of course there's no control, right? If you don't tell me the truth, if whatever you say, the outcome is the same. If the outcome is not influenced by your choice of type, then there's no control over you. But in fact, the outcome X star depends on Ti hat through the optimization problem, argmax. Okay? And in fact, so if you parse it out and you plug Pi into the UI, you'll find that in fact this X star over here and this X star over here are being influenced by Ti versus Ti hat. Okay, that's what's going on over here. Any other questions? Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
okay, so I mean, here's another way of drawing it pictorially, okay? I have basically T1 hat, just to think of this, let's say we have 4 people. There's T1 hat, T2 hat, T3 hat, T4 hat, okay? Now these are the 4 types of the 4 players, all right? What I'm going to do is these contribute to the choice of X star, okay? All right, now I'm going to use X star to compute P1, P2, P3, and P4 payments, right? These payments contribute to U1, U2, U3, and U4, right? Because payments are part of the utility function. Now, what this guy wants to do, let's say agent 1 wants to essentially compute, maximize U1 equals V1 minus P1. Okay? It got that P1, and it turns out that to maximize V1 minus P1, what it has to do is says, well, I can't really control P1 directly. I can control P1 backwards by controlling X star. I can control X star backwards by controlling T1 hat. So if I say T1 hat, then X star is going to be properly computed. It's going to maximize P1. It's going to maximize U1. So you've got to work backwards through this chain and say, oh, the only way I can control my final U1 is to give the right value of T1 and not say T1 hat. Because of the fact that the argmax is over the Ti hat, because it's argmax over a T hat, the vector T hat, all the types, rather than over T. Okay, I'll do an example later with some numbers which hopefully clarify it a little bit. Any other questions about this? Okay, so I'm going to leave it up. We'll take a break, think about it some more. After the break, I'll continue with this over here. Principles, actions, because I want to focus on one specific part of it. Okay, first, agents reveal Ti hat, that tells type. You do an optimization, so it's just an optimization problem. We've seen that before. You compute X star, the outcome, and then you tell each agent you're supposed to pay me something, which is Hi of Ti minus hat, and then the sum of the valuations of the chosen outcome. Now, I haven't said what this is, and I'm going to talk about that now. That's called so this is basically, if you take away H, let's say H is set to 0. All right, if this is 0, then all the payments are negative. Right? All the payments are negative, in which case the principal is paying out money to people. Okay, it's paying out money in such a way as to induce truthfulness, which is fine, but then why should the principal be paying out money? After all, the principal wanted to achieve some objective. So H is a free variable. We can kind of play around with it in order to get different outcomes. There are many possible ways of choosing H. For example, you can choose a sufficiently large offset. So what the principal can do is to compute the largest of these payments, and then say, okay, I'm going to set H to be equal to the largest of the payments, in which case, one person pays nothing, or whatever. All the people who are supposed to pay the largest amount, they all pay nothing, and everybody else pays something. So the principal never has to pay out money; he only receives payments. You can always do that. That's not a big deal. It turns out that there is a particular value of H called the Clark pivot value, which makes life somewhat better. So I'm going to describe what the Clark pivot value is first, and then I can tell you the properties, though I'm not going to prove the properties. I'm just going to tell you what the Clark pivot value is. So the Clark pivot rule is it guarantees rule or value, it's the same thing. It guarantees individual rationality. That means it's always better to participate than not participate. And also, secondly, it can guarantee that it's maximizing revenue. Okay. To the principal. Okay. Now, these are conflicting objectives, right? To maximize the revenue to the principal, you could do it by just saying, well, H is infinite. Everybody pay me infinite amount of money. But then it's better off for somebody to not participate in the game. They'll say, well, I'm going to not participate in the game because I'm going to have infinitely negative utility from playing in the game. So what we need to make sure essentially is that u sub I is always greater than or equal to 0. Okay, your payment can never exceed this. Okay, so if you do that, then it's going to be individually rational. Given that it's going to be individually rational, we want to now therefore maximize the revenue to P, and that's exactly what the Clark pivot rule does. Okay, so again, I'm not going to prove this. Let me just tell you what it is. So to do this, I need to define a new term called X minus I. Okay, so recall that X star is the outcome that is the outcome that comes from the optimization. X minus I is also an optimization. It's defined as argmax. So optimize over the free variable X. And what you're going to maximize is something slightly different. It's sum of j not equal to I, vi of X Ti hat j, sorry. Okay. Compare this with the optimization in step 2 over here. In this step 2, we are computing the optimization over everybody over all I, or all agents. Xi, on the other hand, x minus I is computed as the optimization as if I was not a player. Okay? So we define that as being x minus I. So we just say, well, if the first player didn't play, what would be the optimal that would be computed? That would be x minus 1. If the second player didn't play, what would be the optimal value? That would be x minus 2, and so on. So that's x minus I. All right? Then the payment for the PI value, over there we had left HI undefined. The PI value for the clock pivot rule is given by sigma j not equal to I, Vi of x minus I Ti hat minus sigma j not equal to I Vi of x star Ti hat. Okay. So what is the payment? Payment has two terms. The first term is what would be the valuation for the outcome x minus I to everybody else. Okay. This is basically the valuation from the valuation from a game played when I did not participate, and this is the valuation of everybody else for x star outcome. So I did participate. Okay, that's here. So if you, I unfortunately erased the previous value, but if you compute the previous value of the payment had essentially h. Oh, sorry, I have it over there. So compare this with this. This is the same term over here. Okay, this term over here, sigma j not equal to I, this box value over here, or double box, just to, is the same as this double box value over here. I haven't changed that at all. I've just essentially given you a value for h. And of course, h cannot depend on I by definition, and therefore we need to look at the x minus I rather than x star over here. This way, it doesn't depend on I. Okay? So this is the payment with the clock pivot rule. So this is the clock pivot value. Okay, and the reason, so what happens with this pivot value is that we can look at now the utility to an individual from this. So we know that ui at x star, okay, with some payment pi and type ti is equal to vi of x star t sub I minus pi. So that's what we had earlier. We're going to just plug in the value of pi, so that's nothing more than vi x star ti minus where did I put this? Sorry, on the wrong page. Minus sigma j not equal to I vi x minus I ti minus sigma j not equal to I vi of x star, oh sorry, vj t sorry, there's a bug in the notes. It should be j, so in the summations there should be j's over here. Okay, in equation 12, the summations are over j. I forgot to change the variables over here. But this is still x minus I. It's the valuation for j from the x minus I, vj x star tj hat. Okay. I'm just basically copying it over here, and then this can be rewritten as two terms, sigma j not equal to I vi, sorry, again this should be vj x star tj hat plus So UVJ. Okay, so let me just kind of walk through this over here. I just rearrange the terms over here. What's going on over here is that this over here, okay, is the valuation of everybody else from the outcome x star, and this is i's valuation of x star. Okay, this is a Clark-Groves mechanism. So from the previous proof, we know already that Tj equals Tj hat, so we can actually take that out. Okay, because this is just, everybody's telling the truth already. I'm not changing the structure anyway. I'm just telling you a particular payment function. So this then becomes nothing more than sigma. Basically, this whole thing becomes the total utility of the outcome x star. Okay, and this becomes what? The total utility of the outcome when I does not participate. Okay, or the best possible outcome when I does not participate. So let's think of it again. So this whole thing can be thought of as basically utility when I participates, and then utility when I does not. Okay, so what's the difference? The difference between utility when I participates and I does not participate, that difference is just I's contribution to the global utility. Okay, and that is what? That's your individual utility. So in other words, your utility over here, I's utility over here, is exactly its contribution to the global utility. Okay? Yes?
On the third line, first summation, it should be T hat, right?
Yes, I removed the T hat. I removed the T hat because, yes, it should be T hat, but this is a Clark-Groves mechanism. And the Clark-Groves mechanism, we've already shown that truth telling is dominant. So in that case, Tj hat will be equal to Tj. Right? I can just write that down as equal to Tj. So I can take that out. So the interpretation of this is that agent, let's say 5's utility is exactly the contribution that it makes to the global utility. Okay, so in what's called as alignment between your local utility and the contribution to the global. So essentially, each person's utility is added to the global value, and we optimize the sum of the global values. And this is happening, because you're telling the truth. Everybody's telling the truth. So everybody kind of participates in accordance to how much they value the whole thing. Okay, this might take a little bit to sink in. There's a lot of notation here, and I also noticed there's one typo in my notes, as I mentioned. It should be somewhere J, it should be J, V sub J, not V sub I, as a copy and paste error. But anyway, is this point clear? Okay, so each person is getting as much utility as they contribute sort of to the whole society. This is utility and I participates, I does not. So if there's a big pot, and if I doesn't participate, it shrinks a little bit. That gap that it shrinks is exactly what I is contributing to the whole thing. Okay, that's a bit deeper than what I can. You really have to. I'm drawing triangles all over the board. Okay, you have to go and figure out what the triangle means. Okay, so you have to look at it, stare at it some more, and figure it out. It's not something that I can get into your head simply by repeating it over and over again. You really have to understand it. Okay, so I'm going to do an example to illustrate this, and perhaps that will make life a bit more, make it a bit easier to understand. So, what do I erase? Okay, I'm going to erase this section over here. So let's assume that we want to use the VCG mechanism in a real situation. Okay, I'm going to show you a practical situation. Okay, so here's what's happening. The University of Waterloo, okay, I'm going to take there's a fictitious company, and this company has got 3 departments, and they all share a router, which is their external edge router. And that router is, basically not doing too well. It's sort of, spare parts not available. They need to buy a new one, and it's going to cost $3,000 to buy it. So the cost of a router is $3,000. So the chief information officer or the CTO, whatever, goes to department heads and says, okay, guys, It's going to cost 3,000. Do you really want one? Yes, of course. We want one. We want one desperately. Why do they say that? It doesn't cost them anything, right? Okay, I mean, there's free money, right? Somebody says, do you want something? It's not going to cost you anything. Everybody says, of course I want it. Nobody's going to say no, right? It's like somebody can says, do you want a free trip to the Caribbean tomorrow? Yes, I really need one. Okay, why would you not say that? So the CIO knows this, and they're all lying. He knows they're all lying. Okay, so he's going to set up a VCG mechanism to tell them, make them tell the truth. So how does he do that? What it does is like this. Let's assume, and we'll put some numbers in just to make it sure. Let's assume that each department head has their own internal valuation for the value of the router. Okay, value of the router. Again, remember this internal valuation, now we're going to have to do it in dollars because everything has got to be done in dollars, right? The V's are in dollars. The valuations are in dollars. Let's say that department 1, they're going to roughly get 1/3 of the router, right? So the first department head really values it for $500. The second one values it for $500, and the third values it for $2,500. Okay, that's their internal valuation for whatever reason. That's what they think is the internal valuation. Now, from the CIO's perspective, if the sum of the internal valuations exceeds $3,000, it's worth buying, right? However, if the sum of the internal valuations is less than $3,000, it's not worth buying because the internal let's say they're all perfectly happy. The router is crummy, it doesn't do a good job, but they don't feel that the router has adding any value to their business operations. They may say the internal valuation is only $10. So all three of them have the internal valuation of $10. And so if they were asked to pay, they wouldn't pay any money. It's only worth $10 to them. But if you say, do you want a new router? They say, yes, we want a new router. Right? That's what's going on over here. That's the incentive. Incentives are not compatible. So what the CIO does is this. It says, okay, I'm going to set up a VCG. What I'm going to do is you have to reveal to me your true types. Tell me your type, and your type value is just this. That's the type. Okay, so the CIO says, what's your internal valuation? Tell me your valuation. Is it, is it $100, $200, whatever? And so the true types are 500, 500, and 2500. Okay, but they could lie, right? So the first case say my true valuation is $20,000. Okay, of course you should buy the router because my valuation is 8,000. So what they do is we set up a Clark pivot payment like this. Okay, we compute x minus I, and then we compute x star. So x star is like this. X star is if sigma Ti is greater than 3,000 buy, else don't buy. So x star is just a binary variable, 0 or 1 or true or false, whatever you want. It says buy or don't buy. If the sum of the types is greater than 3,000, then buy, otherwise don't buy. That's x star. Okay, what about x minus I? Let's compute x minus 1. X minus 1 is the following. X minus 1 says it's not going to be playing, right? You pretend that the first person isn't playing. Is the sum of the valuation greater than 3,000? Yes, it is. So the value is buy. What about x minus 2? Well, it's the same as x minus 1, so that's buy. And x minus 3 is don't buy. Okay? So hopefully now the meaning of x and x star and x minus I is becoming clear. Okay, these are outcomes. So I'm defining the outcome, whether you buy or don't buy. But we have the valuations on the outcomes. We'll assume kind of obviously that valuation of any I for don't buy equals 0. I mean, obviously, if there's no value to not buying. Okay, we're going to make that assumption. Of course, you can have other assumptions saying, well, it's going to die anyway, so if you don't buy, some other valuation. But anyway, let's just assume this. And then if you buy, Vi of buy is nothing more than Ti. If you buy it, you're going to get the valuation you said you're going to get, right? So given this, we can now plug in the Clark value from here, okay, the Clark pivot value from here. So let's just do that. It's really easy. So let's compute P1. Okay, what's the first term? The first term is the sum of the valuations for everybody else when one does not play. Okay? What is the sum of valuations for everybody else when one does not play? Okay, so what's the valuation for 2 when one does not? Okay, when one does not play, what is x minus 1? It's buy. What's the valuation of buy for 2? Sorry? 500, right? So it's 500. And what's the valuation to 3 from buy? 2500. Minus, what you're going to subtract is the valuation of the equilibrium outcome, right? The equilibrium outcome is buy because the sum is basically minus what? 500 plus 2500. Okay, so P1 plays nothing in the equilibrium, right? P2 is the same as P1, so P2 gets nothing as well. It's the same exact thing, right? P1 and P2 are symmetric. This is why symmetricity is beautiful. It can just saves you a lot of math. Oh, it's symmetric. It's easy. What about P3? Well, if P3 does not participate, the outcome is what? Don't buy. What's the valuation of 1 and 2 when the outcome is don't buy? 0. So it's 0 plus 0 minus what is the outcome for 1 and 2 when you in equilibrium? Actually, no, x star. Okay. So what is V1 when x star is buy?
500.
Yeah, so it's 500 plus symmetricity. 500 equals minus 1000. So basically, the CIO has got to pay P3 $1,000. Okay, that's the Clark pivot value. That from the mechanism. So in the end, the CIO says, okay, reveal your types, and then they all reveal their types. He does this computation, plugs away, and says, okay, department head 1 and 2 gets 0, department 3 gets $1,000. And from this payment structure, thanks to our math, we can ensure truth telling. It's almost like magic, isn't it? You tell people what are your values, you say, you give one of you get $1,000. All right, you're all rational, you all told the truth. Yes, Sandy. Say that again.
I mean, like, how did you use the...
Who is the you? Is it the principal or?
Well, you said, like, the router's worth $500 to player 1.
Yes, correct.
But how do you come up with those numbers?
That's based on their own business rules, right? So suppose somebody comes to you and they say, okay, I'll buy you a Lamborghini. What is it worth to you?
Right, but I mean, I could lie, like...
You could lie, exactly. You could lie. If somebody asks you this, that's why I said T1 is this, T1 hat could be wrong, right? However, the thing is that because it's a Clark-Gross mechanism, if they're rational, they're going to work out all the math that is on the board right here, and they say, my utility is maximized if I tell the truth. So I must tell the truth. If I say anything but the truth, the computation of x star would be wrong. Just to give you an example over here, right? Let's say you set it too low. You really wanted the router, your valuation was, let's say, $1,000, right? And you're 1/3 of 3,000, right? It's $1,000, but you didn't want to say that. You just said my valuation is $20, right? If it might end up that the router was not bought, so that wasn't a good outcome, right? So you had to, if you say anything more than what you said, right? You'll say my valuation is $50,000, all right? What will happen is that basically the optimization, it will go through in this case, but I have to work out the math, but your payment may be higher. I'm not sure exactly how this will work out over here. But essentially, you have to show that the truth telling is going to be a dominant strategy for you because it's a VCG mechanism. And all I'm doing over here is just plugging in the Clark payment rule. It is kind of interesting that it actually works out. You can think about doing this in real life, which is why mechanism design, people are quite excited. Oh, look, there's something you can do. It's not completely made up. Now, it is made up. I've made a few assumptions, and after the break, I'll talk about that. But I just wanted to run through the example to kind of set the ideas down. Because people say X and X star. What is X and X star? These are decisions. These are outcomes. These are things like purchase, don't purchase, take a trip, don't take a trip, this, that. All of these are actual outcomes. Okay, the valuations of the outcomes are numeric. They're dollars. Everything is dollars, or other currency, but they're all monetary units. Yes.
So there's
let's see that. So I have to compute the, okay, let's say the internal valuation was 2,500, he lied and he said 3,000, you're saying, right? You get a better payback, let's see. So P2, P3, no, he's getting the payback of 1,000 no matter what, right? P3, right, is going to get 1,000 no matter what. So truth telling is dominant because it's no worse than lying. And if you go below, then you can actually lose out. So it's the same as, the victory auction. It's no worse to lie than to tell the truth, and sometimes, it's no worse to tell the truth than to lie. And because this, of course, is nothing more than H minus I, right? It cannot depend on what you say. Yes?
If a second player lies at the same time,
yeah,
then he will get more.
If the second player lies at the same time, yes, but we are assuming that, the game is being played by non-cooperative players.
Non-cooperative, but even in a
yeah.
random fashion, they can both lie.
Let's see. Yes, I mean, you can have situations if everybody's lying. Okay. So the assumption has to be made over here that I'm not going to be able to affect anybody else's outcomes, right? I'm not going. They're going to lie or not lie. See, the maximization that we saw, the truth-telling is dominant maximization, is based on the assumption that I cannot control what anybody else does. I can only control my own component. Right? If my own component is to tell the truth, then I should tell the truth, right? And then if everybody does that, right, then it's dominant. Okay. Now you're saying, what if somebody else told a lie? I don't know who's going to tell a lie. I'm going to assume they're all going to do the same kind of computation and going to come up with the thing of telling the truth, right? If somebody deviates, they're being irrational, and then it's not, that's not a rational player. You have to assume player rationality over here. So it's almost like Nash in some sense, right? In Nash, we kind of have this, there is a strategy which we said this is the Nash equilibrium value and you won't deviate unilaterally from it, right? It's getting there, but not exactly. There's still dominant strategy in the sense that it dominates all of your strategies to do this. And, rationality is sufficient for you to make this dominant strategy. Just individual rationality, or just rationality. Everybody's going to maximize their own utility. They're not going to do anything else. Right? But you're right. If two people collude, you and I can collude and say, hey, you know what? Let's both of us report higher values or lower values, and that will influence the outcome. Yes, then it can be broken on that side. Yeah. Any other questions about that? Okay, so I would highly recommend you go through this, and there's a homework assignment question which has a similar mechanism, where I'd like you to compute the Clark pivot values for a different decision, and I think you should try it out. Okay, let me take a short break, and then we'll finish with the limitations of mechanism design and the limitations of game theory. Right. Limitations of mechanism design. So far we've seen sort of the good part of mechanism design. I've kind of referred to a few things about the fact that it's the most practical form of game theory, and certainly it's been embraced by computer scientists. There's a book that came out last year on computer science in game theory, and there are several chapters in the book on mechanism design, distributed mechanism design, mechanism design without money, etc., etc. And I would encourage you to take a look. It's edited by some really great theoreticians. Nevertheless, there are some problems. So what are the problems? The first problem has to do with the information assumptions. And what I mean by that is that we have to assume that the principal knows the form of the utility function of all the players. Okay? It's a pretty heavy requirement. Okay? Right now we're assuming that in this case the utility function is just their type, their valuation in terms of money, but it could be arbitrary. Somebody for example, we already know that the value for money is not linear, right? It tops up. At some point you don't having extra dollar doesn't really help you. So but this utility function is just clearly linear, right? So these information assumptions about the form of the utility function are pretty strong. The second thing is the complexity of the valuation function. So we said that we need to know essentially the form Vi of x star, right? We need to know the valuation of x star. What is x star? X star is the outcome. Okay, we've looked at very simple outcomes, which is buy or don't buy. But let me show you an example of something which is very complex. That is what's called a combinatorial auction. And this is actually very common in practice. And I'll give you an example which happened just a few months ago in the United States. They had the whole country. US is often drawn like this. And this is Alaska. And they divided it up into portions. And in each portion, you could buy some spectrum. Okay, you could buy some spectrum, and these are companies that paid billions of dollars for this. Now, it may turn out that there is somebody who wants to operate in this part of the country, the New England area, and basically wants to have contiguous parts. Okay, own all the contiguous areas because they don't want to bid for something over here. It's no sense. It's the other end. They don't have people there. They want to bid everything over here. On the same time, if you just get one, that's not enough. You need to get all of them or none of them, right? In other words, I can take some set of elements, let's say 1, 2, 3, whatever, to n, and I can look at the power set of 2 to the n subsets of n, right? And I can have bids placed on the power set, okay? Of course, right away you see this exponential number of power sets, and I need to know the valuation of the for each player of Pi for each member of the power set. So if I only have n elements, I have 2 to the n different combinations, and I need to know the valuation for 2 to the n, and that makes it a very complex valuation function because I'm going to say, well, if I give that guy these 3 and the other guy these 2 and the other guy this 4, well, okay, that means this is the value of the outcome, but if I give that guy 4 and this other guy 3 and this other guy 2, some other outcome, etc., etc. So even communicating the valuation function takes a long time, but even ignoring that, this is a pretty complex valuation function. How do you know what it is, right? You're supposed to know the form. And here we need to know sort of exponential number of things about each agent, right? So that makes it pretty hard. And in fact, that's one reason why the combinatorial auctions are not done in this way. The third problem is the centralization. So here the principal computes argmax over computes the optimization problem. It computes over all the valuation functions and all the reported types. Now, if you have 1,000 agents and each of them has a valuation over 1,000 different items, 2 to the 1,000 different values, you can imagine it's an enormous optimization problem, and it all has to be done in one location. Okay, so one of the research areas that people are looking into is, can we decentralize it? Is it a way to partition the optimization into sub-problems, and each person can work in a sub-problem, and you kind of sum it up somehow. So that's a line of work that people are looking into. But that certainly is a problem. The other thing is what's called non-approximability. And to understand this, recall that to make truth-telling optimal, it's necessary that the value x star is the optimal value. Okay, the computation finds the actual exact optimal value. If the x star outcome results in something that's not optimal, then there is a possibility to game the system. You can, truth telling is not necessarily dominant strategy anymore. Okay, so we cannot just compute the approximate optimal value. It has to be the optimal value. Okay, you can't just say, well, it's approximately the right thing. No, it's got to be the right thing, otherwise the math doesn't work. So, but then when we do optimization problems, we don't necessarily have exact optimal. We just have approximate optimal. And so when you have approximate optimal, is it still a dominant strategy? We don't know. It may or may not depend on the. It may depend on the structure of the problem, and so people are looking into how to fix that. But it's a problem with the VCG mechanism. There's this issue of fairness, and the fairness over here is pretty straightforward. I'm assuming that the valuations over here, the value for money for everybody is the same. They all value $1 the same. Now, it's very, very likely that the amount of value I place on $1 is much less than the value that Bill Gates places on $1, right? For him, $1 is like, doesn't even exist, right? And for me, it makes a difference. And my kids, $1 is a lot. I can get a lot of work out of them for $1, right? So obviously, my valuation of $1 and my kids' valuation of $1 and Bill Gates' valuation of $1 are different, right? And the Federal Reserve, their valuation of $1 is very little. 700 billion, it's just, wave a wand and 700 billion appears. Even Bill Gates can't do that. So is it fair that we should all be competing in the same auction? Because I'm going to maximize the valuation, and these valuations are incommensurate because I'm adding these utility functions with valuations in this. So, to take a practical example, there's a painting, I think it's worth $100 because it's a lot of money for me, and Bill Gates says, oh, that's $1 million. It's not a big deal. It's just $1 million. Okay, so the mechanism design is going to assign it to him. It's not fair. Fairness is a problem. And finally, budget balance. So budget balance, as I said, comes in two flavors, weak and strong. In the weak budget balance, the principal doesn't pay out any money. In strong budget balance, there's no money paid out to anybody. All transfers are symmetric. It balances out in the end. It turns out that the VCG mechanism with the Clark-Privet rule maximizes revenue but doesn't result in budget balance. We already saw an example where, in fact, you had to pay up, the principal had to pay up $1,000 to one of the agents for the thing to work. Now, budget balance can be achieved by using expectations rather than dominant strategy. Okay, so we can by using what's called a Bayes-Nash equilibrium concept, and there's a in Bayes-Nash with Bayes-Nash equilibrium, we're doing essentially we're using this equilibrium concept of Nash with expectations. That's a Bayes-Nash. I won't go into details. There is a particular acronym that shows up over here, the DAGVA. Yeah. So there is, anyway. So there are two authors, D'Aspremont, and the other guy's name is Gerard Verret. And the DAGV, I guess DAG, actually there's no A at the end, it's DAGV. So D'Aspremont and Gerard Verret are the two authors of this Bayes-Nash equilibrium. They found that with the Bayes-Nash equilibrium, we can guarantee a mechanism that has budget balance, right? Except two problems. First, you have to go into this very complex expectation business. It's already hard enough to get this to work, all these consumptions. Now you have to assume that every agent has expectations over the types of every other agent, okay, which makes it even more complex. And so I didn't really need to go into it at all. And secondly, this is not individually rational. Okay, in some users, some agents would be better off not playing the game in the first place. So we give up something to get budget balance. You have to give up individual rationality. So that's why this is not a really great concept to have. So I didn't really cover it. But if you want to look up DAGV mechanisms, you'll find a lot more about it. Okay, so anyway, this is basically the limitations of mechanism design. So very briefly, a lot of information problems, a lot of complexity, and computation is hard. We have to be exact in the computation. It's not fair anyway, and you end up losing money. Okay, so you have to balance all the hype about mechanism design with some of the real problems that are there, and there's the people looking into solving these. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go into sort of the general notion of game theory and end up with some limitations of game theory. Again, game theory I think historically was applied in the study of war games, okay, and parlor games, bridge and chess and so on and so forth, and has become very fashionable for people in computer science to study game theory. So one of the reasons that you're studying this is because there's a lot of papers out there that study game theory. Okay, the notations or the terminology of utility theory, utilities, preferences, Nash equilibria, all of these show up all over the place. However, there are some real deep fundamental problems with game theory. So I started working in game theory around 1988, and by 1991 I was convinced that this whole game theory thing was bogus. All right, I'm going to tell you all the reasons why I think it's bogus, or at least why it's impractical. Okay, so and then I stopped working in it for that reason, and I did a paper on mechanism design for my course project in 1990, I think. And it was the first mechanism that I know used in computer networking. As I think I mentioned this earlier, it was a hopeless failure because the game theorists didn't know what the internet was, and the internet people didn't know what game theory was. So suddenly I started seeing papers with game theory, and I said, wow, people are really using game theory. I said, okay, have solved all these fundamental problems. Have they solved all these problems that I ran into 20 years ago? The answer is no. So what are the problems? Let's go through them one by one. First, for game theory, we need to know payoffs. We need to know the game table, right? We need to know that if you play this strategy, another person plays that strategy, this is the outcome to each person, and in fact you need to know the utility of that as well, right? But these are private things. You don't really know what the outcome means to the other player, right? So it could be that, take an example, I play a particular move and Bill Gates makes a particular move, he loses $100, and say, oh, he's going to lose $100, he's not going to play that. Well, he doesn't care. Right? For him, $100 is nothing, so he doesn't really care. So I need to know the payoff structure, right? And the payoff structure is, to begin with, can be very large. If you have a large game with lots of possible moves, you need to know the payoffs for every possible strategy. The second problem is time, or modeling time. When you play a game, there are two kinds of games you can think of, which are what are called simultaneous move games or sequential games. In a simultaneous move game, you write down your strategy on a piece of paper and you put it in an envelope, and all the players do that, and then the person who's running the game opens the envelope and says, aha, these are the strategies they want to play, and then plays out the game. That's the equivalent of what it is. All the moves are made simultaneously. However, there is no notion of time. All the moves just happen afterwards. If you take a sequential move game, it's like a card game. You play cards, you place a card, etc. But there's no absolute time. It's just ordering. It's relative ordering. So play one place, play two places, and so on. But take a case of the Wi-Fi game. The Wi-Fi game, person one sends, and then up to about 10 microseconds later, nobody else knows. Okay, the slot time in Wi-Fi is 10 microseconds. So if you're far enough away, speed of light propagation delay is there, etc. You don't actually see it. So the information structure of the game actually changes every few microseconds. If you have 10 people, so if somebody in that corner turns on their Wi-Fi station, that information that they've turned it on, which is a move that they made, they played the game, they played the move send, right? That information does not actually percolate to this end for maybe 8 or 9 microseconds. So for 8 or 9 microseconds, I'm in the wrong state. Maybe we say 8 microseconds is a very short time. Well, it's not. Okay, we're talking about decision processes on the firmware which happen in the time scale of nanoseconds, right? We're talking about a 1 gigahertz processor. That means you're having one instruction per nanosecond, right? So in 1 nanosecond, so 1 microsecond is 1,000 nanoseconds. So you have 1,000 instructions pass for each microsecond of a thing going by. So by the time the decision happens, 8,000 instructions have been executed by this processor on this side, where the other side just says send. So information asymmetry is there, and time is critical, right? I have to model the fact that I'm closer, I get to know sooner, but person further away gets to know further away. But games generally don't model time. Okay, and that is the main reason why I gave it up, because I was trying to study congestion control, and everything happens in the network is timed. You send a packet, reply comes back, it gets dropped or doesn't get dropped. All these things involve the notion of time, and the game theory, generally speaking, cannot deal with time. So it's a really fundamental problem. Third problem is assumption of rationality. You have to assume that all the players are rational. However, experiment after experiment after experiment has shown that players are not rational. People are not rational. Okay, you can look at all sorts of economic experiments that have been done in the lab, in the field, whatever, and people are just not rational. They are not. If you look at this structure over here, I think you were asking Ruth, how does it work, right? You have to kind of work backwards and say, well, my utility is maximized if I control this, if I control that. You work backwards. You have to be quite rational to work it all the way backwards. But would your grandmother do that? Mine wouldn't, right? So this perfect rationality, this perfect computability of mathematical functions, etc., is really not true in games. It's not true in real life. And in real life, the people who are writing the code that runs the firmware, that runs the routers and endpoints and writes TCP, these are human beings. They're not rational either, right? So we end up with a lot of irrationality And this is the information problem. So we have problems of information, problem of time, problem of rationality. We're not done yet. Number of players. So in a game, the number of players is known. Okay, we have 2, 5, 10, 20,000, whatever. In a network, what you're trying to do is model a resource. Let's take the Wi-Fi game again. I don't know how many people are sharing the Wi-Fi spectrum. It could be I may be the only person. There may be 20 people in the room. There may be 100 people in the room. I don't know. And worse, number of players, it's dynamic. It changes over time. People come and go. And even if people don't come and go, the data needs may come and go. So lecture starts, everybody puts away their laptops. Suddenly, the data need has gone to 0, right? So, and then class ends, everybody turns around, suddenly the number of players goes up, and people walk away, and then it changes again, right? But no game theoretic model that I'm aware of works when you have a dynamic number of players. This next thing is this maximize the sum of utilities. Okay, we saw that with the mechanism design, and unfortunately this kind of modeling of maximizing sum utilities shows up all over the place in other models, in game theory, which I didn't discuss over here. But this is basically wrong. Okay, you cannot do this. And you go to the economists and you say, how can you doing that? They say, well, we assume everybody has the same value for money. And I say, well, that's not true. They say, well, we can't prove any theorems otherwise. And our job is proving theorems. So, well, that's a problem. So at least you shouldn't do it. And finally, we need massive communication potentially. Why do we need massive communication? Well, to begin with, if you're going to create Bayesian expectations, I need to know the types of all the other players. Remember, in the Bayesian expectation, we have this notion of common prior. If you like correlated equilibrium, we have a common prior assumption. We kind of know what the equilibrium outcomes are going to be based on the expectation on the type of the player. Or in a move, we had these games, Bayesian games, where we had this move by nature. The move by nature decided the types. But of course, that's just modeling the fact that each player has consistent prior expectations on the types of all the other players. But that consistent knowledge is gained only by observation. All right, it's only gained by observation. So we need to have massive invasion of privacy. Okay. To take an example, again, the Wi-Fi game, if I want to know if a particular station is going to be transmitting or not, I can classify them very naively as high traffic and low traffic type nodes. Okay, just a simple classification. Then I have to observe them to see which are they. So I have some expectation on that. But then I need to observe people in terms of communication going on. So this whole monitoring apparatus going on. So all Bayesian games suffer from this problem. And then, of course, there are other issues as well. If you notice in the mechanism design, we had the same thing, complexity of valuation function. If the valuation function is being communicated, we have to communicate exponential number of values as well. So these are at least my critiques of game theory, why I think it doesn't work. Still, we need this information problem, time problem, rationality problem, the player structure, this interpersonal utility comparison, and this need for communication. So let's say, okay, this is a pretty negative message. If it's so negative, what's the point? And the point, I think, is that it gives you insight. Okay, it gives you some kind of ability to model the motivations of the different players and to give you some insight into how these things interact with each other. One cannot discount the value of insight. Okay, at the end of the day, when you build a network, when you design something, a real system, your decisions are based on insight. You cannot actually practically go and check everything. But if you have sound intuition, good insight, it works. So these argue against a blind, implementation of game theory. Just take the thing and just plug it in, and it works. No. What it argues for is insight into the understanding in the very same way that queuing theory gives you insight into how queues behave, the transient behaviors of queues. I cannot go and predict that the queue in front of Tim Hortons is going to be exactly 7 people at 2 or 3 a.m. or 2 or 3 p.m., but I can give you some insight into how it fluctuates. Okay, I can give you some guidelines into the sizing. In the same way, game theory gives you some insight into how decision makers interact. So basically, that's where we're at. Okay, I'll stop there. Are there any questions about this? Okay, good. Thank you.